But I know quite a bit about tomatoes. I work for a seed company called Premier Seeds. You've probably never heard of it. You'll probably never hear of it again. My role, I deal with all the vegetables you buy and eat on your plate. I deal with the growers who grow them. So dealing with the indoor growers, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, outdoor onions, broccoli, carrots. So basically the complete range. I've had nearly 20 years in the vegetable seed industry, so I get to see daily what's happening in greenhouses, particularly with tomatoes. And prior to that, I had 5 years as a commercial tomato grower myself. So I suppose I could say I've got a lot of experience in growing myself and observing what commercial growers grow. These are notes for you to take away. Notice a number of people were here early, so you've probably read them and know more about them than I do, but that's fine. But any questions you have, please feel free to ask. Just stick your hand up if you've got a question. I'm talking about something, you've got a question, I'm happy to take it. My email address is there, so you might go away and think, what about that? Well, just email me. I'm happy for you to do that. Right, we will start. So, growing tomatoes, if you keep it simple, should be reasonably straightforward and successful if you get some key things correct. So, to me, some of the key things are buying the right tomato plant, your site selection, where you're going to grow it, giving it some good food, good water and attention, and good sunlight. So, if we start off with site selection first of all, one of the key things for growing tomatoes is all about sunlight. If you put a tomato plant in the shade, it will grow, but it won't grow well. It'll struggle. Tomatoes will naturally stretch towards light. So if you have them in the shade, they will stretch towards where the sunlight's coming. If you have them in the sunlight, they could sunbathe in it all day. So your site selection of where you're going to grow tomatoes is actually quite vital. Often we think about what our parents did when they grew tomatoes, and a lot of tomatoes are always grown up against a fence, and it's usually a fence where the sunlight pours in on it. The fence provides a bit of shelter, as well as somewhere an easy way to train the tomato up. And it just naturally can just soak up the sunlight. Ideally, you'd have your tomato where it can actually have sunlight from sunrise to sunset, but often that's not possible. So you want it in a site where it's going to get the most sunlight of the day. You could argue that morning sunlight's better than afternoon sunlight, but I would tend to say try and get it in a position where it gets the most sunlight on the whole day. So sunlight is absolutely vital with growing a good tomato. Tomato selection. If you come along to Oderings, they have all sorts of varieties basically to fit everybody, and a lot of that selection of the actual tomato plant is going to be what you like in terms of, do you want a big tomato, a small tomato, do you want a low acid tomato? So they've got all those, but then there's can you buy pottle? You've got them in trays where you buy say 6 together, or and you can get grafted tomatoes. So I'm a great advocate of a grafted tomato, and I'll just go through what a grafted tomato is, because I won't presume that everybody knows. So essentially, grafted tomato, Oderings will take 2 tomato plants. You've got something to white board.
It's just that.
Oh, right. So they'll take two tomato plants, and they'll cut them. So they they'll cut that one there, and they'll cut that one there, and they'll take that part and join it onto that part. Now these are grafted tomatoes, and it's very actually hard to see where the join is. But actually you can actually, right down the bottom, you can see a bit of a scarring. But the grafting today is so good that it's very difficult to actually see where they join the tomatoes. Okay, why do they do that? Well, if we go back to this plant here, that's called a rootstock, and that's called a scion. So the top part they take and join it on the bottom part, that's the scion. So that's the variety. So if you want a potentate or a money maker or a early girl, that's the variety, and then they stick it on the rootstock. Why do they do that? The key is if the rootstock, what the rootstock does is it gives the plant vigour, and it gives the plant power. If you got some rootstock seed and sown it, it is the most horrible, ugly, smelly tomato plant you'd never want in your garden. They produce a lot of leaf because there's a lot of vigour, and they smell. There's a really funny smell to them. So by combining the rootstock and the scion, you're incorporating the attributes of the variety, so the size, the colour, the taste, and you're combining it with what the rootstock gives you, and that gives you power. And I'll talk a little bit about what that gives you later on, and all the benefits of it. But I'm a great advocate of grafted tomatoes. They are more expensive because they take that you're essentially taking two tomatoes and making one, but actually, in order to get those two tomatoes, there's quite a procedure involved, and they actually use quite a bit of seed to try and get a good rate of grafting, a successful rate of grafting. So yes, it is expensive, so you do pay more, but to me, it's well worth it. Any questions?
Yeah, for growing in containers, would you suggest a graft one or a full one?
The question is, if you're growing in containers, would I advocate a grafted one? Yes. Yeah. I'd almost. We'll talk about later when I talk about pests later. We're going to talk about psyllid, which is a pest which is around now, and to me that is one of the key reasons why I grow a grafted tomato. But I'll talk a little bit about that later. Yeah. Okay. So site selection timing. In Canterbury, they always talk about a labour weekend or show weekend as the key time for planting outside. Why is that? Well, we'll look at this cold snap we've just had. I think we're going to get a frost tomorrow. So if some people may have planted them outside, they may have some shelter, they might be all right. But we still can get some harsh frosts. I can remember my grandmother talking about one Christmas, or just before one Christmas, I don't know what year it was, they had a harsh frost and it killed all their tomato plants, and that was just pre-Christmas. So we can get, just like we've had, a real cold snap. In some ways, there's not necessarily an advantage in growing early or planting early, unless you are, say, got a small greenhouse or a covered area where you can protect it at night. So you can get an advantage of getting the tomato plant in and established and picking earlier than you would normally. But yeah, that rule of thumb, labour weekend, show weekend of planting, why? Well, that's to do with cold snaps like we've had and the chance of frost. Okay, Oderings have got, you can, in terms of site selection, you can either grow in your soil or in a container, or you can actually buy a bag of Oderings fruit and veg mix, cut a hole in it, and put your tomato plant into that and use this as the basis. You just got to remember to put some holes in the bottom for drainage. Do you ever having it standing up or lying down?
Standing up.
Standing up. Yep, more room for the. Yep. Okay. So we've got site selection and the variety. I was given the question before it started about taste and what influences the taste in tomatoes, and there's a couple of things that to me are important with taste. So variety can be a key, but also I think the way it is grown, so like the soil it's grown in and the fertiliser that's used and the type of watering that you have are very important in terms of taste. There's an argument about whether the heirloom varieties probably got better taste than some of the current varieties. I'm not sure actually. There's probably more experienced people with those who've grown those sorts of varieties who might be able to answer that. But I certainly think that the food, site selection, soil, and sunlight and watering have a real bearing on taste. So let's go to food. Now, in terms of fertilisers, I want to go over what an NPK rating is on a fertiliser, because that's quite important to understand about for tomatoes. So when you go and buy a fertiliser, on a bag of fertiliser, they will have, sometimes you really got to look for it, but all fertilisers have to show it, is your NPK rating. So this tui tomato food, NPK rating is 3, 4, 8. So this is an indication of how much nitrogen's in the fertiliser, how much phosphate and how much potassium. So for me, the most important thing about a fertiliser is your potassium, or your K rating. And for me, I believe that when feeding tomatoes, you need a much higher K or potassium rating than you do with nitrogen. Nitrogen promotes leaf growth. Potassium promotes reproductive growth. So if you think when you put a tomato in, you don't want lots of leaves, you want tomatoes. So you want to promote the initiation of flowers, the setting of the flowers and the growth of the fruit and the ripening of the fruit. So if you have too much nitrogen, you're going to get a plant that tends to grow a lot of leaf, will probably stretch quite a bit, will grow very tall. Where higher in potassium, potassium, the energy is going to go into the reproductive parts of the reproduction. So initiating flowering, producing the flowers, setting the flowers, producing the fruit, ripening of the fruit. And potassium also has a real influence on taste as well. So if you're looking at what sort of fertiliser to use, specific tomato fertilisers are very good, and but check. I advocate that you check that the potassium is always higher than the nitrogen. Look, if you've got some fertiliser at home and you want to use that up and the sort of similar ratings, that's absolutely fine. But maybe at some stage you need to get something where you can actually give the plant a boost of potassium. Any questions at all? I must be saying all the right things, all right? Okay.
So what's the middle one for?
Phosphate. That's more to do with root growth. So if you're growing potatoes, you want something with a higher phosphate on it. If you're growing a lawn or lettuce, things that are leafy by nature, you go for the nitrogen. I mean, that's, dairy farmers, they typically use something that's really high in nitrogen. They don't necessarily want this potassium because all they want to do is grow grass. Okay, so leaf, root, flowers.
When should you start feeding them a granulated?
When should you start feeding them a granulated fertiliser? Probably right from the start. Sometimes it's hard with your soil to know actually how much food's in it.
Not before they go in the ground?
Yes. There's no sort of rule of thumb. A little and often is probably the, you can put some in before, like if you're digging over the soil, you can add some fertiliser to the soil, dig it in, put your plant in, maybe put a little bit of fertiliser on top. Something like this tui tomato food, you tend to use this more often than you would, say, nitrophosphor blue. So nitrophosphor blue, this is a really good fertiliser. 12, 5, 14, so it is slightly higher in potassium. It's a good all-round fertiliser for your whole garden, but it is a bit more slow release, where this is a little bit more immediate release. So you might put this around your tomato plant every, say, 6 weeks, or you might go every 3 or 4 weeks, put a handful around your tomatoes with that. So, it's, if you've got a nice, everybody's gardens are different. Some can have real sandy soil, some can have real heavy soil, some can have real compost, lots of compost in their soil. If you think your soil has got high fertility, then maybe you start off just with a little bit and add more as you go. One of the key things with the tomato plant when it's growing is you always look at the head of the plant. That tells you what's happening in the plant. So even when the plant's this high, you don't look at the older leaves and go, oh, they look a bit yellow or pale, or maybe it's hungry. You're always looking at the head of the plant, of a tomato plant will always tell you what it's doing. So if it's looking a little bit sort of yellow, then maybe it needs a bit more fertiliser. You see, what I like about these is they're nice and there's a nice rich green colour there. It looks healthy. You see this leaf here looking a little bit yellow. Just ignore that. So, particularly with tomato plants, you always look at what the head of the plant is doing. Everything else below it is what has happened, and you can't correct that. So commercial growers, they're always, when they're walking in their crops, they're always looking at the head of the plant and what the top 3 or 4 inches are doing. And that determines what they're going to do for the future in terms of more heat or more water or more fertiliser. All right, so when you are growing your tomato plant, always look at the head, and whatever's below it is what's happened, and you can't do anything about that.
Do you pull off the bottom ones when they go yellow, or you dye naturally?
I'll answer that by talking about training. So we'll jump over to training the tomato. So, a tomato like this, I take it home, I plant it. It's got a stake. It's going to need a bigger stake because in another week's time it's going to be here, or it's going to need to be picked up against some trellis. So you're all the time growing it up and training it and supporting it. The other thing you need to do is between each leaf and the stem, these little things grow, and they're called laterals. So there's one under here, there's a little one there, and they become big, and they essentially can go off and become another tomato plant, because they'll actually produce flowers and fruit. But often a plant like this can't support a whole lot of stems, their own separate stems. So you're tending to take that lateral out, so that all that energy is going into the head of the plant and what's happening up here. If you want to get sophisticated, you can you could take a lateral, maybe this one here. You could take that and train it so you have 2 separate plants growing up. But you could probably it's best to do that on a grafted plant. Why? Because actually on a grafted plant, again, coming back to the rootstock, you've got the vigour, you've got the power to be able to support that. In the commercial settings, depending on what time of the year they're planting, and commercially they grow tomatoes 12 months of the year, they will grow what we call 2-on-1. So they'll have 2 stems for one, for 2 growing tips for one plant, because the rootstock can actually support that. That's if you want to get sophisticated. Otherwise, just concentrate on the one stem, take the laterals out, which will grow, which will sprout, well, not sprout, but come away as the plant gets taller. And so you're taking those off, so the energy is going into the head of the plant and producing the flowers in that. I mean, up here there's already a little truss of flowers been initiated, so we want the energy to go into that. Now I've got down here training. Once the plant is up to its 5th flower truss, start taking some of the lower leaves off to encourage air movement. So the answer to your question is yes, if they are going a bit yellow or the older leaves, yep, do take them off. So when your plant's about that high, you know, do start taking off the lower leaves. One of the key reasons is to do with airflow. So you've got to think of the reason why you want to encourage airflow, because airflow keeps the plant healthy and dry. And if you've got too many leaves, then it you can get quite an area of humidity, and from humidity you can get a number of diseases. So it's good to encourage, once your plant is, say, that high, about your 5th truss, flower truss, you start take a couple of leaves off, and when it produces the next flower truss, take a couple more. So you're getting not also just air movement, but you're also those lower trusses of tomatoes, as they start growing, you're also letting the sunlight in on those as well, and that helps with ripening and producing really good tasting fruit. Just with the training I've got here, by late February, flowers in your outdoor plants will not have enough time to pollinate and grow to maturity. So if you think late February, if you've got a flower truss coming out, it's still going to be another 6 or 7 weeks before you actually start picking those tomatoes. Now, unless you're in a glass house or a really warm sheltered area, the problem is we're going into reducing daylight, shorter days, not as much heat in the day, and the chances of actually of harvesting those fruit are probably remote. So, I mean, what you can do is you can either pinch the head of the plant out, or you can actually just keep the head of the plant growing and just take those flower trusses out. Why? Well, it encourages the energy to go into what you've already got there. You know, growing a tomato, you've got a finite period of time, and that's going to come to an end depending on the type of autumn we have in late March or into April. So you might as well put the energy that you've got in the plant into what's already there and trying to get as big a fruit as possible, and focusing on that rather than thinking you might get a few tomatoes at the end, which you're probably not likely to. If you're not sure about that, if you've got 2 plants, maybe leave one plant and see how that goes and compare it with the other plant. You know, if you take the trusses off. Any questions about training of tomatoes at all? Yep. What? To tie the plant to a stake? What do you guys sell?
Everything.
Right.
But in particular, I love we sell this big ball of like twisty tie. It's almost like pantyhose.
Right.
But it's a lot thinner. And so it moves with the plant, and it doesn't tend to cause any cutting or anything of the stems.
Yep.
I can actually go grab a thing in a minute and show people.
Yep.
That's probably the best, but we've got foam ties, we've got twisty ties, we've got everything.
Yep. So Odering's got a number of products you can use. I think you essentially use anything. I think you've just got to be mindful of, say, wind and the plant buffeting. So a tight bit of string will tend to cut or bruise the plant. Flexi tie.
Flexi tie. Is that like a cable thing? Yeah, not really.
No, probably too thin. It's probably going to cut or bruise the plant. Yeah, I mean, an old piece of stocking or something like that, something which will support it, but also if the plant's been buffeted by wind, will right. Thanks, Olivia.
I have a question. Is growing in a greenhouse different to outside?
Yes. There's benefits. There's some real benefits. This is a lovely environment. We're in here now. Perfect. Probably a little bit humid, but it's warm and it's sheltered. So the benefit.
Training them, is it any different? I've got a small one at home.
Yep.
I'm into my third year of growing tomatoes.
Yes.
In it.
Yep.
I've been growing them outside for years, but I grew them in the ground in potting mix the first 2 years.
Yes.
And I decided to go into bags this year, so I've taken all the potting mix out.
Right. Yep.
Put weed mat down. Our neighbours' trees have all come through on it anyway. So
Right. Well, that's okay. Yeah. So the question was: is there advantage? What's the advantage of growing in a greenhouse as opposed to outside? Well, in a greenhouse you can put your plants in earlier because your greenhouse is going to give you some natural frost protection. So, how early would you put your plants in your greenhouse?
Mine are already in, so let's start.
Yep. Yep. You can probably put your plants in the greenhouse in September. So first benefit is you can get earlier production. It's going to be warmer because when the sun's out, it's naturally going to be warmer in the greenhouse like this. You know, this is just tomatoes sort of love this sort of temperature. Disadvantage is it actually can get too hot, and so some greenhouses will have vents. You know, if you're away for the day, if you go away like on a day like today, get up in the morning, it's horrible weather, and you go away and you leave the vents down, and then the sun starts coming out and starts heating up. You can run into problems like that. One of the advantages of growing tomatoes outside is air movement. What air movement does around the plant is it actually keeps the plant dry and which means it can give it a certain amount of protection from a number of diseases. Where in the greenhouse you'll probably get more of a humid atmosphere, which can encourage more disease. Yeah, we'll talk about whitefly in a minute. It'll probably encourage whitefly earlier than you'd get outside. Ideally, I would have a greenhouse to grow them in because you can grow your tomatoes fast and start eating them earlier. And grow them. Yes, yeah, and grow them later as well. Sometimes your restriction can be on the height of the greenhouse, and that can have an impact on the way you train your tomato. Okay, watering. Generally, plants will require 1 to 2 litres a day, less on cloudy days. Regular watering is important. Time and application and amount can be critical. It's quite like if the best time of the day to water is to me is in the morning. It's a bit like having a good breakfast, and we have a good breakfast in the morning. The plants, you give them a good water in the morning. That can see them through most of the day, depending on what sort of day we have here. You get a strong northwest, and they're going to need more water. What I advocate is often people come home and water their garden after work in the evening. If you're going to do that, put the water at the roots of the tomato rather than washing the tomato. So people get the hose out and they'll wash their tomatoes down watering them. The thing I don't like about that is what it can mean is the plant can go into the night wet and damp. If you have a shower, you don't tend to go to bed, wet. You won't sleep well. It's not healthy, etc. You need to dry yourself off. And the same with tomato plants. So if you're going to come home and water your tomato plant, put the water at the roots and try not to get the leaves wet. A tomato going into the night with wet leaves has probably got more chance of getting a number of leaf diseases than a plant that's dry. Any questions about that at all? Sorry? Can't do much about the rain. No, that's life. And the heavy dews in like in February at night, that's life as well. But you'll probably tend to find when you get into that sort of February, March period and we get those heavy dews, that's when you'll start seeing, particularly on the older leaves of your tomatoes, that they will start looking as though they're getting a little bit more disease or mildews, that type of thing. Not a lot you can do, but that's just part of growing outdoors. But it's best not that we add to that ourselves, if that makes sense. If you are growing in containers, and like in your greenhouse, you've got them in, you've grown in bags, or in raised beds, you are going to need more water. It's all about gravity. And watering, I would say watering is one of the most difficult things to get right. I'll go to my father. My father, he grows the same tomato plants. He saves his seed. He grows his own plants, puts them in the garden, and say in January, February, he'll say, "What do you think of my tomatoes?" And I'm always telling them they need more water or they need less water. He can never get it right. So I think it's hard to teach and hard to actually explain, but you've got some people who go, well, when they water, they will water their soil, and because it looks wet, they think it's got enough water. But you've actually, you've got to get to know your soil or your containers, and actually, you know, when you water, maybe go back 5 minutes later and actually have a scratch around and see actually how wet it is, because more often than not, when we water, particularly if a container is got quite dry, if you go back 5 minutes later and you have a scratch around, it still can be dry. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to get right. If you've got generally, like commercially tomatoes aren't grown in soil anymore. They're grown in inert media. Like what they call rock wool, which is like sounds funny, but it's a spun rock and it's quite inert. And so when they water, they'll water to runoff. So and they'll water to about 30% runoff. So if they put a litre in, they'll expect 300 mils to come out the bottom. And they will, in the commercial setting, they might water 10 to 14 times a day, not a litre at a time. It might be 300 or 400 mils at a time, just depending on what time of the year and how hot it is. But they're always watering to runoff. So if you've got a container, or like if you're growing in one of these bags and you watered it, I'd want to see some water coming and draining out the bottom before I stopped. So watering is critical, very difficult to get right. Sometimes we can give too much, sometimes more often than not, we don't give enough. Any questions about that at all? It's a hard one to convey and even demonstrate. I think it comes with experience, but I'd encourage you, once you've watered, maybe go back 5-10 minutes later, have a scratch around, even dig down a couple of inches and actually just see how wet it is, so that you get to know, wherever you're growing your tomatoes, get to know the media, the soil or the containers, so that you've got an idea of actually how much water they need. And particularly if it's in a container, make sure you got, as I said, make sure you're seeing some runoff, and then you've probably got enough water in there.
I've found over the years with watering, if it doesn't dry out too much and you just keep it at a certain sort of level, it absorbs more.
Yep.
Does that make sense? If you let it get too dry, the water runs straight through it. It's really hard to get it back to that point. But if it's still at a certain moisture level, but
Yes.
not wet,
Yep. Yep.
it absorbs the water better.
Yes.
For some reason.
Yep. Particularly so when you're growing in a container or in some sort of potting mix. Like peat-based potting mix, if it gets dry, it is extremely hard to re-water and get. So if as you say, if it stays wet, a certain amount of moisture, then it's very easy to add to it. My experience, bark-based potting mixes, are much easier to if they get dry, to get wet again. But peat-based, they have a sort of a natural repellent. Peat is fantastic at holding water and growing plants in, but if it dries out, it's very difficult to re-wet. You can, if you do have that problem, you can get sell re-wetting agents. You can have stuff you add to your watering can that you can water, and that it's like a miracle. It can re-wet peat-based potting mixes, but as you say, if you can keep a certain level of moisture there, then it's very easy to add to. Right, looked at the plant selection, site selection, advantages of grafted tomatoes, food, watering, training, pests and diseases. Whitefly. Who gets whitefly? What do you use to get rid of it? Or do you live with it?
Last year I didn't do a lot because I had so much before I realised in the greenhouse.
Right.
But I found they didn't do any damage to the plants. Or
No.
is it something you can't see?
Well, okay. Okay, so this is the... Okay, that's tomato plant, all right? Whitefly will tend to... Whitefly, if you don't know what it is, it's a little white, tiny, a bit like a sandfly, and it's white, and it flies. Whitefly. So typically it will be under the leaf. Sorry?
You shake the plant, they fly.
Yeah. Or you don't even need to shake it. Turn over a leaf. So this is one of the problems. This is one of the problems we do is we look at the plant and go, oh yeah, that's all right. Turn it over. Oh, okay. So the whitefly will always be under the leaf. Now, whitefly in themselves, as you said correctly, they actually don't do anything for the plant, anything to the plant. However, the life cycle of a whitefly, I think it's about 6 weeks. So you have these little. What happens is they essentially, if you see one, then you've probably got 5 others. And if you're worried about it and you see one, you probably need to do something about it, because the whitefly. This is a graph. That's population, that's time. Whitefly population can go like this. Okay, so if you don't do anything about it, you can get a real explosion of the population. Now, it doesn't actually do anything directly to the plant. What it does do is, so the whitefly up here, I don't often see this in home gardens, but you used to see this quite a bit in commercial settings. The whitefly has a sugar excretion, so that drops onto the top of the leaf here. So you get looks sort of like melted sugar. Sort of sometimes you just won't see it. But what happens is you get the sugar excretion here, and then you get what's called a black sooty mould grows on top of that excretion. And so what happens is the whole plant starts getting this black sooty mould all over it, and that stops photosynthesis. No photosynthesis, death. Okay, so the whitefly is indirectly killing the plant, because it doesn't actually, the whitefly under the leaves, they don't do anything to the plant at all, but their excretion is a sugary excretion. It lands on the tops of the leaves. The black sooty mould comes along. Well, not comes along, but it loves it, and so I've seen, you don't see it now very often because most commercial growers have it under control. But you could go in and there'll be plants that are just covered in this black sooty mould, and they're struggling to grow, to produce flowers, to produce fruit, and so that's how they eventually will kill the plant. Whitefly is very difficult to get because of this explosion in population. If you want to do something about whitefly, then you're best to spray as soon as you see it. you've got, just depending on the spray you use, you've got to remember about trying to spray under the leaf. So rather than sort of going along and just, spraying up here, the whitefly will be under the leaf. So really you've actually got to move the leaves, get them moving, and actually get the spray underneath. Some sprays are what they call translaminar, so if you spray it on top of the leaf, it actually transfers not through the plant but directly to the bottom of the leaf, so that can kill it like that. Now there's a number of products here that are good for whitefly. You've got Super Shield, Maverick, Yates Success, Beta Bug, Natural Debug. But so if you want to do something about whitefly, you need to start early, because a lot of these sprays will kill the adult, but they don't kill the egg or the nymph that is. So you can go through and kill all the adults, but meanwhile you've got all these eggs and they hatch, and a certain amount of time later they're suddenly become adults and they're laying eggs, and that's why this population goes like this, because it's just a rapid explosion. Whitefly is they do love hot conditions, so you'll get more of a population in a greenhouse than you will outside, because it's naturally cooler outside. You tend, what my experience, you tend to get the whitefly when we get into sort of January, February, and by then you've sort of had a fill of tomatoes and you've moved on to something else and you don't really care, and if they fall over, well, But if you really want to look after them, you need to get onto whitefly early. No, I think you've got to see it. I think you've got to see it first.
Unless you put neem tree granules down.
Right.
To stop chewing and sucking insects.
Okay. Yep. I'm not familiar a lot with the neem tree. That's another product that they sell here. So that if you want to prevent it, that would be a good product. Was it neem?
Yeah. It's called neem tree granules, and you pop it into your vegetable garden, or particularly tomatoes, at time of planting, and it's an amazing preventative. So it stops all chewing and sucking insects. Since I started using neem granules in my vegetable garden, I haven't had aphids, whitefly, nothing at all, ever. And you do need to apply it more than once. So when you reapply, you need to scratch it through the soil and actually pop it in, otherwise it tends to have a layer of mold growing on top of it. But you need to get it in there, but it is very, very effective.
I must try some of that, actually. The next important insect they've been using Acacia up until this nasty insect came along. So, and Acacia is commercial growers can use this insect called Acacia. And what it is, it's a predator, and it's released regularly through the greenhouse, and the Acacia essentially lays its egg in the egg of the whitefly. So the whitefly population will naturally, it won't go like this, it'll actually, it'll come up and then plateau off and slowly go down, because the Acacia that's released, and it's a tiny insect, you can't actually see it, it's like, they're absolutely tiny. So they come along and they lay their egg within the egg of the whitefly. So the egg of the whitefly never hatches and the population is just decimated. To answer your question, what do commercial growers use? They will use some what I call soft insecticides. There's a lot of actually soap-based soaps used nowadays. Surprising number of soft soaps that are used as an insecticide. So they'll regularly use it as a preventative, because there's always some whitefly there. Okay, psyllid. This is a nasty little insect that came along about 10 years ago into New Zealand. I've got down here psyllid. It's like a miniature cicada. It lives on top of the leaves. Look for a sugar-like substance on the top of the leaves. The sugar is a secretion from the nymph. Unfortunately, if you see the sugar-like substance, then it might be a bit late, actually. That means you've got a real high population. But essentially, sometimes you'll see it on tomatoes, it looks like a whole lot of sugar crystals on top of a leaf. If you've got that, you've got psyllid, and you've probably had quite a high population of it. Okay, why is this such an infuriating insect? It's the damage that it does. The psyllid comes along, sticks its little pecker into the tomato plant, and it transfers a bacteria called Liberibacter. And it infects the plant. So what's the result of the infection is the head of the plant starts to go all yellow, sort of mottly. It won't produce flowers. It will keep growing, but you look at the plant and you go, there's something wrong. It's very yellow. Yeah, it's very yellow-like head. That's why it's called, often referred to as psyllid yellows. And essentially it kills the plant. Has anyone sort of seen that? You'll tend to get it. Yeah, you'll tend to get it later in the season. The population of psyllid does seem to be temperature related. So at a certain temperature, like last year, we probably would have seen the effects of Liberibacter early because we had such a warm, November, December, or really hot November, December. So that encouraged the population. This has been a major insect problem in commercial growing. I know commercial growers who would say they've never seen it, but they've seen the effects of it. Now the psyllid actually is very, very easy to kill. If you're spraying for whitefly, then you'll be naturally keeping any of that population down. Problem with the psyllid is you only need one to land on that plant, and then the next day move away, but he's already injected his Liberibacter into that plant. So this is the thing with commercial growers is the whitefly will land and they'll stay there and you can see them. These things can come in, move on, and you've never seen them, but then a certain amount of time later you see the effects of it. This is why I advocate a grafted tomato. Yes?
I'll get 2 tomatoes tried about December or January. Beautiful plants,
All of a sudden they
just die.
So does the head go yellow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a whole lot.
Okay, so this gentleman said that he's had a couple of plants in that December, January. Would it be more January than December, more after Christmas? Yeah, because it's not often you'll see the damage before Christmas. It's usually once you get well into the... Yep. 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 I mean, that sounds like typical Liberibacter symptoms, where you can have the most magnificent plant, and then suddenly it just goes funny and starts, well, not necessarily, it just doesn't die on you, but it just doesn't do anything. Were they grafted plants? Okay. The only way around this is to probably use your neem granules. Yeah. Yep. Or spray. So, as I said, they're very, very easy to kill. If you're spraying for whitefly, then you're naturally going to kill the psyllid. Unfortunately, it is a thing that can come and do its damage and leave. You've never seen it, and then you see that resulting damage. Commercially, when I say it's been quite devastating commercially, is that you've got growers that will be regularly spraying, but yet they can still get the psyllid damage. What also can happen commercially is is often you start seeing the damage when the plant comes under stress. So, psyllid can come in, say in December, inject the plant, but you may not see the damage come up till maybe February or March. It depends on a number of things, and often that can be I've seen this commercially where when a plant's gone under stress, that's when you've seen these symptoms come through. The whole psyllid thing is one of the reasons why I advocate grafted tomatoes, is because I've seen this with my own eyes in my father's garden again, where he's got his open pollinator plant that he's grown himself from seed, and I've put in a grafted tomato, and his open pollinated plant has suffered from Liberibacter and these psyllid yellows way before the grafted tomato has. Why? Because the grafted tomato gives that plant some oomph and vigour and power that can just give you that extra few weeks before those symptoms actually kick in. But this is quite a devastating little insect. It not only affects tomatoes, it can affect potatoes as well. Anything in that sort of family as well. But if you're regularly spraying for whitefly, you'll be taking that out if it's about. So it's easy to kill.
So do they lay their eggs in the tray while you're doing it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, do they overwinter somewhere, and do they have a host plant they like to be on?
Do they overwinter? Do they have a host plant? Yes. Unfortunately, they can. Like commercially, I've seen that they can overwinter in hedgerows alongside greenhouses. Temperature does have an impact on population, so it won't. If we have a harsh winter, it won't get rid of them, but the population will be down. But when the temperature comes up, then that's when they start. Their population starts increasing. So if we have quite a cool spring and early summer, we may not see the effects of this as much as if we have if it's hot early. What the host plants are, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but they certainly, like whitefly, they will. A greenhouse grower can clear out his greenhouse, get it all clear and clean and hygiene it, but unless he does something about what's around his greenhouse as well, keeping weeds down, that type of thing, invariably they will, both these insects will find some sort of host plant outside the greenhouse. The thing is with psyllid, it's always going to be there, and if you keep your property clean, it might be the neighbour's property, or even down the road further, and it will get blown in or fly in. In some ways, it's a bit of a. In some ways, it's the risk we run of growing tomato, that you can have a lovely crop like this gentleman here, and then suddenly, boom, that happens. And I even think if you sprayed regularly, there's still a chance that it can, you get the old one coming in between sprays and infecting the plant. So that's it's a bit of a lottery, which I don't have an answer to. Yes.
There's the psyllid cloth that you use.
Psyllid
Cloth.
Yes. In fact, Oderings sell what do you call it?
Green cover crop.
A green cover crop. So you can. It'd probably be quite effective in a cloche or in a greenhouse where you could have this. It's a very tight woven cloth. It can let air through, not a whole lot, but you could line the fence with it, and say the door with it, and that will keep all insects out. My problem with that is it will keep a certain amount of air movement out as well. So it's, you might keep that insect out, but you might suffer other things going on with your plants because it's too hot or too humid. But yes, commercially it's not being used. I don't see it being used commercially, but yes, you can. You can get an Oderings sell that sort of cloth. Yes. Yep.
So what, if you did that, what would you look for to indicate overheating or lack of air movement?
I think you probably find your plants probably wanting to wilt a bit more, or requiring more water because it's and you might find you're starting to get mildew on the plant because it's more. I would expect there to be more humidity, and so you're probably getting more mildews and that sort of more leaf disease, caddis-boring leaf spot, that type of thing. That's you may or may not get it, but that's for any growing healthy plants. I believe require a certain amount of air movement to be able to dry the plant out and keep that sort of thing at bay. We're very fortunate in Canterbury as opposed to Auckland in the low humidity that we have here. We don't have some of the problems they have with botrytis and leaf moulds and leaf spot and stuff like that in the North Island, and like commercially they're always they will spray a lot more fungicides up there than we do down here because of that, because we have a nice dry environment here. I'd encourage you to try it, but if you've got a certain area, try one area with that cloth, another area without it, and see for yourself if there's a marked difference or what the benefits are. Any other questions at all? Companion planting. Probably not something I am well experienced with. I've dabbled in that sort of thing. Yeah, well, yeah, nice environment. Yep. Tried marigolds at all? Ground tomatoes? Yeah. I think there is some benefit, but it's never 100%. And often with companion planting, the companion plants grow that tall, and your tomato plants grow that tall. So initially, when you put your plants in, I think there are probably benefits, but as the plant gets taller, then the insects will just fly over. Yeah. Yep. The leaves get cool. What time? So the question was, growing tomatoes outdoors, this lady sees the leaves that will curl. Old leaves or young leaves? At the top? What time of year? All the time? I'd expect you probably tend to see it in older leaves. I wouldn't worry about it too much. So I would also check if the plants get enough water too. So the lady's also saying, is that a sign of being cold? I tend to say, I'm not sure. Right, yeah, all right, yeah, okay, maybe look at that, yep. I tend to think you'd have that curling being the older leaves. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It could be a combination of night temperature as opposed to day temperature. Because that's the thing in Canterbury, we can have a 32-degree day and then it could be 13 at night. And so, boom, where in Auckland, they will have a 27-degree day and a 25-degree night. They have all sorts of other problems because of that. I prefer our hot day and cold night. That can be an effect. It can be a combination, I think, of that time of year, age of plant, and fruit cracking. So the lady gets cracking in her fruit. When you water the plant, do you wet the plant? The cracking of the fruit, is that more, say, around well after Christmas, say in February? Yeah. A lot of that I think is to do with the dews at night. Typically, if your plant gets wet, like a dew in the February area, so the skin of the fruit gets wet, and then the sun comes out, it dries, and it will crack. No, I'd say it's more to do with moisture. I work for a greenhouse grower. Christmas night, he'd switch his boilers off, so he would heat his crop till Christmas, and then he'd switch his heating off, and so after Christmas he never heated at night, and he would always get cracking. And we noticed the fruit would always be damp in the morning. When I started growing, I always, even after Christmas, I ran a certain amount of temperature to keep everything dry. Because one of the problems that you can have, is, particularly if you're in a greenhouse, is your fruit. Like in Canterbury, let's say we get a 12-degree night, your fruit cools down, and the next day the sun comes up, and then suddenly she's sort of 20 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun's pouring in, and these fruit are still cold from the night, with the sun pouring in on them, wanting to heat them up, you see. And so you can get, that doesn't help as well, particularly if, put a heater on them. Outdoor, put a heater on them. No, that's, no, there's probably not much you can do about that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, we have had a major problem with psyllid, and you're right, the grafted one did much better, but when we grow the grafted ones against the pests, is the grafted one too strong to grow against the psyllid? They too vigorous?
Not if you tie them up, not if you can support them, no. No, they should be all right. Yeah.
Did you maybe want to repeat that question?
Oh, sorry. So the question was, you've had psyllid before. Grafted tomatoes you've found have been stronger. You've typically grown them up against the fence. Can you grow them up against the stake? Right. Yeah. I mean, you can do that on stake as long as it's supported. A grafted plant doesn't necessarily grow any faster than a non-grafted plant. May grow a little bit faster, but not necessarily, because some varieties will naturally elongate more than others. Some varieties will have shorter internodes. That's the distance between the trusses, where other plants will have longer. So sometimes that's more a variety than whether it's grafted or not. But I'd encourage you to grow them against the stake, but just make sure that heavy fruit loading is supported and one day doesn't fall over. Any other questions at all?
Yeah.
Oh, one at the back here. No, you're not. No, you won't transfer it. The only way it can be transferred is by the psyllid. It's the only insect that does it. It's a nuisance. Yep.
Blossoming rot.
Blossoming rot. Blossoming rot. So what is the best thing for blossoming rot? Blossoming rot is when you have a tomato, you see your tomatoes and they ripen, and the bottom of them starts going black, and sort of like the plant gets sort of sucked in and there's like a scarring on it. Is everyone familiar with that at all? If not, go home and Google it, blossoming rot. Blossoming rot is to do with a calcium deficiency. However, adding calcium doesn't, it's actually all about watering and not calcium. So blossoming rot, it's to do with the plant not being able to take up water fast enough. And we can really get that in Canterbury, because here we can go, say, for 2 weeks where we've got sort of 22 degrees and it's cloudy, or it might be 18, we have 2 weeks of cloud, and then boom, we have a nor'west come in and it's 34 degrees, and it's blowing a gale, and the plant's going, I need a lot of water, and its roots are trying to suck it up, and because the last 2 weeks the roots have got lazy and they haven't had to suck up much water, they suddenly can't suck up enough, so they go, okay, I'll suck it out of the fruit. So blossoming rot is a calcium deficiency, but adding calcium won't solve it. It's actually all about watering, and usually not enough water. it can actually be, you can still get it if you've overwatered, and because watering in the media in your soil, it's all about the right balance of air and moisture. So if you overwater and there's no air in there, the plant, that inhibits the plant uptaking water. So blossoming rot is all about the plant not being able to take up enough water, whether you've overwatered or underwatered. Usually it's underwatering, so it starts sucking the moisture out of the fruit, and that's when the fruit at the bottom collapses and it's like a scarring. If you see it's too late, you're just best to take that fruit off, so you're actually taking a load off the plant, because often what will happen when the plant's what we call fully loaded. So the plant is trying to grow, trying to put out flowers, trying to set flowers, trying to enlarge fruit, and trying to ripen fruit. So it's got all this going on. You get a 34-degree day, and it can't deal with it all. So if you do have blossoming rot, take those fruit off, chuck them away, take the load off the plant, and try and get it back into balance. Sometimes sometimes you, and I do see it commercially, sometimes you just can't do anything about it. It's a result of the weather. But you've got to, if you're looking ahead at the weather forecast and you see that we're in for some really hot days, well then, you just got to think a bit more and make sure you get the water into the soil rather than coming home from work and watering after we've had one of those hot days, because often you'll see the damage actually a couple of weeks later and not the next day. Right, we'll start wrapping this up. Bees are a big thing now. People are very concerned about bees, and so they should be. What I've noticed on a lot of these sprays is they do talk about bees and spraying, and that they are bee friendly, particularly if they're dry. One of the things I found, if you are needing to spray an insecticide, is spray in the cool of the day. Bees come out at a certain temperature, so if you're spraying under that temperature, I've got a feeling it's around 13 degrees. So if you're spraying, say, first thing in the morning when the bees haven't come out, then you can, kill your psyllid and your whitefly, give a chance for that insecticide to dry before the bees come out, and everything should be fine. But that's just something to keep in mind. Hopefully I've covered everything. Just so, to me, tomato plant needs warmth, loves sunshine, absolutely loves sunshine, it thrives in sunshine. It needs water, it needs food, good place to grow. Look after it. A healthy plant, you're going to have less disease if you've got a nice healthy plant. It's like us, if we're healthy, not stressed, then we're likely to be able to work alongside people at work who have got coughs and colds, and we'll be all right. So a healthy plant is really important. So I advocate. I'm really pro grafted plants. I think there's lots of benefits from what a graft from the rootstock. So think of site selection, the best place with the most sunlight, in a warm place. Think about what you're growing it in. If you are growing in the same spot every year in soil, then ideally you can change that soil each year, maybe every 2 or 3 years. Just take it out, get some soil from somewhere else in the garden and put that in and take your soil to where that was. So that's, tomato plants can be grown several times in the same place, but ideally you want to change that soil every so often, or add to it, or even use one of these fruit and veggie mixes. You can use one of those. Think about your food, high potassium, and think about your watering as well. Question here, was it?
With the watering, I know you said about the temperature, but is there like a base point that you call a good watering for the plant, like a litre per plant a day, or half a litre, like any kind of starting point?
Okay, so the question is there a starting point for watering a plant, like half a litre a day or a litre every day? I suppose when you first put the plant in, you add water, not necessarily because the plant needs the water, but it helps settle the roots in. And I'd advocate keeping it wet, not soaking, but not letting it dry out, ideally, because life goes on and we got 101 other things to do and we forget about it. Generally, generally on a nice sunny, a good sunny summer's day, they're probably going to need 1 to 2 litres a day, even if it's a watering in the morning and watering in the afternoon. Again, if you're in a container or potting mix or a raised bed, you're going to need even more water because gravity takes it away. But just ideally, you don't let it dry out. If it does,
Put big straw on top if you're in a glass house.
some real benefits. So the question was, do I put pea straw on to help keep the moisture in? I think it's a great idea. One of the downsides of that is slugs. Slugs love it. I used to use a lot of mulch around my vegetable garden until the sort of slugs came along, and because it provides a nice, moist, wet environment. So yeah, that actually helps keep your tomato, keep the water up to the tomato, but then you've got other problems that can occur. So yes, but beware that you'll probably get slugs crawling all over and eating the tomatoes as well. Right, any other questions? Yes?
What's the best spray for white fly? You talked about one that we can go through the leaf from the top down.
Yep.
Which one would you recommend for that?
So which is the best spray? Is there an organic one? You might need to help me here. Natural debug, that's organic.
Yeah, 100% food grade organic. You can actually eat it. Don't recommend it. It tastes terrible, but that's how safe it is.
Is your neem granules that organic? No.
They are.
It's organic based.
It's organic based.
Based in terms of a neem
but
oil.
You certainly couldn't eat it.
Yeah. I think the success is the translaminar one, isn't it?
That's the only way you get the organic.
So the question is, what is the best
Theory. Yep.
best insecticide?
It's really on personal preference.
Yeah.
Because they all do something, they all work, but as people, we all have different ideas about what is appropriate for your garden. Maybe you've got an inquisitive cat that likes to eat fertiliser. Maybe you've got children that you're concerned about, or running in, like a forced childcare thing. Or it really depends on you, but there are many, many options.
Yeah. See, like Super Shield, it's really good for roses, and will kill a lot of these insects as well. You see, so I think the good thing is there is a good handful of tools in the tool cabinet in terms of insecticides. In terms of fungicides, there's not many. You haven't got much choice. So I think Olivia's right. Really, you've got to come along and find out what you're comfortable with. Some are more potent than others, but generally you'll find, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the stuff they're selling nowadays is pretty when I say human friendly, it's not like you go and spray yourself with it or drink it or anything like that, but they are pretty, what we call soft, as opposed to what we had previously. We don't have any confidor here, although that's going off the market, is that right? Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it's the ingredients in it. We're getting rid of anything that works. Anything that, old school, all these old school chemicals that we all have come to love that actually work very, very well are not particularly very good for us or our environment. So there's a lot of things happening in the world of insecticides, unfortunately. So if you love confidor, buy it up now, because you're not going to be able to get it soon.
Yep.
I have another question about tomatoes when they're hard around the outside. I've thrown I think it's a dark, is it dark delight or purple passion? It's a black one, you know?
We did dark delight.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what I've had the last couple of years, and the skins are quite tough. They're hard to cut into, and I was just wondering why.
So the question was, what was the variety?
Dark delight. It's a
Dark delight. Why are the skins so tough?
black.
Usually that's a varietal thing. Skin's usually So some varieties will have a quite a tough skin, others can have quite a soft skin. It is a varietal thing.
So they haven't treated it any different to the others, so
Right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No more questions. We'll wrap that up. So take that away. My email's on it. If you think of a question afterwards, feel happy to email me or come up and ask me a question after. Anyway, but thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you'll learn something.